Well, you've got a great brain. It's not broken, doesn't necessarily line up with traditional education, and unfortunately, it doesn't line up with most traditional jobs. It doesn't mean that there isn't a number of opportunities out there for you, both in your education and in your life, that will give you a chance to shine.
Welcome to Learn with Dr. Emily, the podcast, where parents and teachers come together for neurodivergent youth. I'm your host, Dr. Emily King, child psychologist and former school psychologist, and I am on a mission to help everyone understand that nurturing neurodivergent children isn't about changing them, but about changing us. Each week, I share my thoughts on topics related to child development, mental health, parenting, education, and parent-teacher collaboration. You can read more on my Substack at learnwithdremily.substack.com or listen here. So let's get started with today's topic.
On today's Learn with Dr. Emily podcast, we are welcoming none other than Penn Holderness to talk about how ADHD is awesome and then sometimes how it's not awesome. So I'm going to be asking Penn some questions from his neurodivergent perspective, and I don't really know what's going to happen.
Okay, so you've got a very penetrating look that you're giving me right now. Let's just let everybody know this. Emily and I our friendship has mostly grown digitally over the last 2 or 3 years because of COVID, and two, it's just easier when you're doing a podcast. And I don't know what I'm going to say or what's going to happen to me because here you are in the flesh.
I feel
like you're going to extract.
So Penn has graciously agreed to being asked some vulnerable questions about what it was like growing up with ADHD. And so we're going to dive in, and my goal in sharing his story and asking him questions that I often ask kids or might ask parents is to help all the parents and teachers listening to jump inside the shoes of a kid or a teenager or an adult with ADHD to think more about what that experience is like. So here is a probably not so quick bio because there's a lot to say about you, but here it goes.
Few sentences.
So Penn Holderness was born and raised in Durham, North Carolina, to a Presbyterian minister and a public school teacher. He played high school basketball and was a choral music student at Governor School of North Carolina, for those who know what that is. Penn went on to graduate from University of Virginia with a degree in philosophy, where he sang in the all-male a cappella group, the Hullabahoos. That was not on Wikipedia. I just happen to know that.
You just know that because you're an a cappella person.
That's right.
That's right.
Penn's first on-air journalism job was in Grand Junction, Colorado, followed by 5 years in Orlando. He then hosted 3 seasons of Designer Finals on HGTV and hosted a basketball show on CSTV with former University of North Carolina basketball coach Matt Doherty. Penn also worked as a video essayist for ABC and ESPN while living in New York before returning to North Carolina, where he anchored the evening news for WNCN TV.
Bingo.
A lot of letters.
This is a very long. I feel like
I have more.
Can I save this for my obituary when that happens in 50 years? There's not, because I'm not going to do much else.
You've done so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have probably first discovered Penn and the Holderness family from the Christmas Jammies parody of Will Smith's Miami that was really meant for a digital Christmas card. But long story short, it went viral, and now they've been making videos ever since. Penn and his wife, Kim, have been married for 16 years. Is that accurate? Or is
Stand by.
No. I shouldn't have asked that
17 and 18 is in April.
Awesome.
so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And their videos have resulted in over 1 billion views and 4.5 million followers on social media. Did you even know that?
Yeah, we have to keep track of those things.
Okay.
But it's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, so Penn and Ken both have TV business experience, and so they're great storytellers, and now they own their own company, Holderness Family Productions, where Kim is CEO and Penn is CCO, Chief Creative Officer. I first met Penn and Kim as a guest on their podcast, where we discuss mental health mixed with fun topics, and they also, of course, have talked about winning the Amazing Race. And they have a book that was released in 2021, and they live in Raleigh with their children, Lola, Penn Charles, and their dog, Sunny. I had to include it all.
Well, thank you for including Sunny.
Yeah.
That's important. I see that it says Fluffy on your...
It does.
But you didn't use that.
I didn't. I skipped it because I felt like it was getting a little long.
So you just figured
But
if you
Sunny
took out
is
Fluffy, yeah, it was just going to be way shorter.
If you need to know,
You're the best.
just check out some videos of Fluffy Sunny.
Thank you for that lovely introduction.
You're welcome. Okay, so I wanted to dive in first with, were you diagnosed with ADHD? Or do you feel like you kind of knew something was different? Like, what's your memory of the very first time you were like, I think I might be different than my friends?
The first time I felt that way was pretty early.
Okay.
It was, I think, honestly, the tics. I had other friends who would, they would fly off the handle, and God, you can't use any of these words anymore, but I was called a spazz a lot.
Uh-huh.
And I know that word is no longer there, but that's what I was called.
Yeah.
And it was insinuating the fact that I would have a lot of energy, and sometimes it would get the most of me, and I would cry really easily, or get really, really happy and stop making so much sense that the people around me would just move on with their day and say, we're going to let him go be over there by himself. The one time I remember, because and I don't blame her for this, my mom was really grossed out about it, was I got back from basketball practice when I was about 8. And it was one of those practices where I wasn't running much, but I was having to learn all these different parts of an offense. And just sitting there and not being able to shoot baskets, my nervous tick was I chewed on my shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So my cotton shirt. And there was a ring of what she thought was sweat. And I was like, oh no, I'm not really that sweaty. And she's like, and she looked and she could see that there was almost like a tear in my shirt. And so for about an hour, I was just chewing on my shirt.
Because when your body couldn't move, your mouth had to move.
You tell me.
Yep, that's what's happening.
Okay, but that was the first time I realized, I think her reaction as a neat person, very, very neat person, not unlike my wife, was horror and disgust, and probably not saying, oh, you're neurodivergent, because no one knew what that was. Right. I didn't hear the term ADD probably until college.
Okay. So you weren't diagnosed with ADHD as a child? Yeah.
No, I didn't get tested until it became a real issue with my ability to graduate from college.
Okay. So what do you think happened in high school? How'd you make it through?
Well, I took a lot of courses that were, I think, quick reward intensive. I was pretty good at science. I was pretty good at math. I was pretty good at memorizing vocabulary words. I was god-awful at comprehension and really bad at history. Just hearing like long stories of anybody that wasn't me. No, I want to hear about me. But then also it was kind of an art school. Jordan was. I think you can. Yeah. So chorus was a class that was hard to get into, like the high-end chorus. So it was a little bit of a performing arts school. And that was, when you look at my college resume, it was very largely performance-based. Yeah. And so my grades were good. I don't remember ever getting a math question wrong until I got into AP. It was just pretty simple for me. And they were good enough, and I tested really well on the SAT. I think the SAT actually, from everything I've heard from other people that I know who have a neurodivergent brain, if you are able to really get into that kind of hyperfocus mode and block everything else out, you can be advantageous. You can be better at taking those kinds of standardized tests. Yeah.
So in a way, the testing part of school worked for your brain.
It did. Yeah. Yeah. Until I got into more critical thinking.
Right. Which was college.
Yes. Yeah. Or some of the AP classes as well. But that was in senior year. Grades are already out there. So
yep. So let's talk a little bit more about that hyperfocus. So you've talked about that like as your superpower. When did you notice that in school? And then when did you realize, oh, I think I can make this part of my job?
Well, in school, I think musically, there was an element of concentration when you have to very quickly memorize, understand, and then produce a sound, whether it's with a piano or with your voice. And I picked up things very quickly. So I know that's not necessarily school. Some of that was outside of it. I think the other, I'm not sure. I'm trying to separate hyperfocus from memorization.
Right, because they are different. So would you say hyperfocus is more aligned with your interests? When your interest, it's loaded with your interests, because you can memorize things really well if you're not interested, although it's probably better when you're interested. So if you're really interested in it, and you're like getting in a zone, basically.
This might be the best example of it. I was always a little bit jazzed up when someone gave me math homework that had a bunch of problems. And
that gives me a panic attack.
I know. And it gives Kim one too, but it's this problem that you can solve and you're good at it and you have the tools. And if you sit there and stare at it for a long time, you get frustrated. And I've seen my daughter like stare at a math problem for 45 minutes until she cries and just not reach out for help. And so I would do my math homework in the 10 minutes in between math and when I got to English class. I would do it every night. And it was about an hour worth of homework that the teacher would say. It's like an hour worth of homework.
Yeah.
But I would, I stayed in my seat. The math teacher knew I was going to do it. No one ever came into the class really early. So I'd stay in the seat for, say it was 10 minutes, for like 7 minutes, because my class was really close. And I just did it all right there. And I turned it into a challenge for myself.
Okay.
Sure, there were some days when I couldn't get it all the way done, but on a lot of occasions, I would finish an hour's worth of math homework in about 7 minutes.
So that's a really great coping strategy. Usually, sometimes we try to teach kids that, but you obviously made it up on your own, which is turn this into a competition with myself, which was basically a timed competition. Like you knew you could do the thing, but can I do it really quick? Because I know maybe later I'm not going to do it because I'll be distracted. And would you have forgotten about it later and you're trying to get it done right then?
I just don't think I would have done it as quickly. I think I would have, if I probably would have gotten frustrated. Like it was fresh in my mind. I think that my brain has a lot of really good RAM. The hot memory and the ROM, like the cold storage memory. Once it gets there, it's hard to bring it back out to where it is. So once my brain is working, I'll tell you some stories as an adult that mirror that as well. When we are seeking out brand deals or creative meetings with other people, and we have to sit there for an hour and listen to whatever their brief is, they almost always want to come away with some sort of musical option. And in 3 occasions, you can ask Anne-Marie this, because she's been in the rooms with me. I excuse myself from the meeting because I've already started writing it in my head and I can't pay attention to what's going on. And in a lot of cases, I will have the full, complete song by the time the meeting is either has just ended or maybe by the end of the day.
So that's the hyperfocus you're talking about, because a neurotypical brain cannot do that.
I can't not do it. I can't like once I get an idea and people are talking, I'm like, what are you doing?
What are you people just talking about?
Yeah.
Right. So that is, it's almost sounds a little bit like a positive compulsion. Like you have to go do it to get it out. Does it feel like that? Like you have to get it out? Or, I mean, I think a lot of songwriters will also describe that. Like I kind of already knew the song. It just came through me and came out of me and I had to get it out.
What's interesting. So Lin-Manuel Miranda and I have a mutual friend.
Okay.
The guy who actually was his musical director. And he was, I've gotten to know him very well. And look, if you're a friend of a friend, you shouldn't be asking him about Lin-Manuel all the time. But he volunteered this information to me because he saw how quickly I wrote music sometimes. And he said, it took him 18 months to write his first song. It took him the rest of the musical he wrote over the course of maybe like another year. So he has this perfectionism about himself that he has to get it just right before he sends it out to someone. There are some people who don't do that and they're really, really good. And I wish I could be more like that and let something simmer just a little bit longer.
Okay.
Almost to just kind of edit myself and make it better instead of being like, oh, we're done.
So is that the downside of hyperfocus and impulsivity probably?
Quality control.
Yeah.
Well, I just think that there's a governor on how good your work can be if you don't take enough time to really try to perfect it. But I mean, look, my job they want things fast. Right. They want things turned around quickly. Yeah. And so I've been very fortunate to find something for now that is asking for that. Yeah. But I am curious, and I know you don't normally do adults, so I'm just trying to get free therapy out of this. What it is about the ADHD brain, and this is frankly for me and for my son, who also has been diagnosed with it, that just won't do long-term projects. Because those are the important things. That's what you should be learning and should be doing.
Well, it's all about executive functioning and the weaknesses that can occur in executive functioning. So for everybody listening, executive functioning is we dream up a plan in our head. You're good at that. We get started. You're good at that if it's your thing, not if it's a history project.
It has to be of personal interest.
Right, it has to be of personal interest. And then you maintain focus to that thing. So here's where ADHD comes in. You have trouble maintaining focus, and then you follow it through to completion, and then you monitor how it went. And that's where like revisions happen and drafts happen. And all of that takes time so that you can, it's like the beginning of that ADHDers are pretty good with. Not so much initiation if it's not of personal interest, but that's where in school we have to really pair the task with an interest if we're going to get kids started on anything, right? And it sounds like in your schooling, you were able to find, things that worked for you and you just kind of stayed in those lanes. And I always tell parents, find the interests, find the strengths, and teach from there. And there's going to be stuff kids hate about school. And I'm guessing that the being in a school building all day was probably something that you did not like about school.
Yeah, I mean, thank God for the performing arts element, which was sometimes twice a day. That was very kinetic and moving, and it was challenging. And sometimes you were sweating when you left because choreography, jazz hands exactly. Don't do themselves. And it was interesting because when I got to college, everything kind of crashed.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So college, of course, is different in structure because you are able to get up and move around and walk to different buildings, but no one's checking in on you.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like K through 12 school probably had its downsides with being in a building all day and having to take things that were not your thing, but you found your way. And then college, what kind of fell apart for you in college, and what did you start to notice?
I mean, pretty early on, I just felt outmatched with some of the things that people were doing, which was like they were going out and partying, and then they were waking up at 7:00 in the morning and going to class and then studying for 3 hours and then going back. I mean, kids back in the 90s. It wasn't quite a binge drinking culture, but it was like have a couple of beers, explore the social side of your life, which by the way, I think is a great thing and was good for me in college because I didn't have any social life outside of performing arts.
Before that,
I played a little bit of basketball. That wasn't really, I don't know how social that was, but I think my parents always thought and believed that I didn't get good grades in college because I partied too much. And some of that might be true. I mean, I definitely was like, whoa, like no one's here. No one's checking on me. I don't have to go to class.
Right.
They don't even hold you accountable until the tests come out. Well, I'm sure I'll just be able to like the night before memorize this and just handle it.
Is that how you got through high school?
I didn't party in high school.
No. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase.
Yeah.
Did you just sit through class, not take notes, and then you just took the test and did well? Or did
Yeah, I didn't take notes.
Because a lot of students with ADHD, usually they crash and burn it in either 9th grade or college. And what happens is they've sat in school and they're like, I get it. I don't need to write it down. I'm not good at writing it down and paying attention at the same time. So I'm just going to maybe listen. It's in here.
Yeah.
And then I'll take the test, and they make it just fine through school. Sometimes it's 9th, 10th grade gets hard. But it sounds like you made it all the way with probably not a lot of study skills because you didn't practice that part. You just took the test.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So let's go through each subject. Math, you don't really take notes.
Right.
You solve problems.
You got that.
And once you solve it once, you solve it again. It's there. It's locked in your brain. Chemistry, science, to me, they were all parts of the universe and parts of the body that as soon as, or whatever it is, that as soon as you learn it, like, that's me.
Yeah.
That's of personal interest. That's my molecules. That's the space. Oh my God. Space. You could tell me something about space. I'll remember it for the rest of my life. But then you get, English, you memorize a word, you use it in a sentence. Good. Like it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But then you got like history and, some levels of like poetry, understanding like Chaucer.
Yeah.
And if you don't take notes on that and understand those things, you run into trouble. So I don't know that I went to the most challenging school. It was a great school and the teachers were fantastic, but I think if I'd gone to a more challenging school, all of my deficiencies would have been discovered while I was still in high school, potentially, and not when I was off on my own, enjoying myself.
So whose idea was it to get tested?
It was mine.
Okay. How'd you know about it?
A friend of mine who, it was my junior year it was on my second stint of academic probation.
Okay.
I can say this now because
Right.
I don't think I'm going to ever apply for a job where they ask me for my GPA. But I
think you're in the clear, Penn.
I was always terrified that people would ask me for my GPA. It was like a
Right.
2.8 or something.
Yeah.
And it was not good.
Yeah.
And so I had a friend who actually approached me and said, have you ever been tested for ADD? And at that point I'd heard of it. And I was like, no. And she said, well, you have it.
Your friend, like your college friend.
Yeah. Her name's MJ. And she also had ADD. She's like, that's why we're buddies.
That's why we're friends.
That's why things go so sideways when we hang out. And she offered me a Ritalin. I didn't take it. It just I didn't want to take a pill that I didn't have. And so I went home between my junior and senior year and had the testing, and it was pretty obvious. And they immediately put me on medication because at that time I don't think that there was really a holistic option.
Right.
When it came to that, I think if you had ADHD, they gave you either Ritalin. For me, it was like a time release capsule called Dexedrine, which I thought was Dexatrim. When the first time they said it, I'm like, why are you giving me a weight loss drug? I look like this. By the way, I did lose about 15 pounds.
Yeah, you do lose weight on stimulants sometimes.
Yeah, and I didn't have much of an appetite anymore. And all my fraternity brothers tried to steal my pills, which we can talk about that later. But
yeah, we're not advocating several things that have been mentioned on this podcast
it's awful.
already.
No, but you asked me the story.
This is
and
the truth of what it looked like in the 90s as a college student. This is true.
So that's what happened. Okay. And I returned to school. Well, first of all, I spent a summer just kind of seeing what the medication did for me, which was, I think the first 4 or 5 days were pretty incredible. Just noticing things.
Okay. Like what? What did you notice?
Walking on the beach and being able to compartmentally appreciate a bird, the sound of the ocean, and the person who you're talking to without losing any of that experience.
So it allowed you to hold on to things at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. Because what does your brain do on the beach?
Well, my friend's talking and I see the bird, or
Gotcha.
I hear the ocean, or the ocean reminds me of a shark or something.
Right. So when someone calls your name, you're just like, bird. I missed what you said because I was looking at the bird.
Yeah. Or you just go to the famous ADHD crutch of when you're not paying attention, you say, wow, that's crazy. Because that can really cover anything. That can cover something that's funny. That can cover like a death in the family. That can cover like a really good job promotion. It's all crazy.
That's actually a really good
I feel awful telling you, but I use it all the time.
ADHD teenagers.
If you hear me say, wow, that's crazy, I haven't paid attention to a single thing that you just said.
Now we know.
Yeah. Well, I already told my wife, and so she... Anyway, yeah. So you go to one of those crutches.
Yeah. So do you remember, thinking back on all those school experiences, do you remember teachers who got you, even if they didn't know like what it was they were getting, but they understood that something was different. You needed to kind of be in charge of saying, no, I need to do this because I'm interested, or I need to stand like this while I learn, or whatever it is. Who do you remember getting it?
Mark McCombs, Hollis Self, Dorothy Finland, and Scott Hill.
Okay. And I just want to point out to everyone listening that if you're working with kids right now, they're going to remember your names.
I know their first names.
Yeah.
Those were the 4 that they got me the most.
Yeah. And what did they get? Different
things. Ms. Self, who I think she passed away, she challenged the crap out of me.
Okay.
She wanted me to get better, and she was very harsh on me. And even when I thought I was doing the best, she said that it wasn't good enough, but she did it in a way that she knew that I had more potential than this. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing works for me too.
Okay.
I know that sounds crazy, especially
it may not work for kind of more sensitive, anxious people, but it worked for you.
For sure. Yeah. And she rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but she taught video editing in 9th grade. And
what was that?
It was 1989.
Yeah.
But it was like stop motion.
Okay.
I did a video called The Death of Gumby. I still remember it. And it was an animation we built a set in a theater, but we also studied Citizen Kane and Battleship Potemkin. She had an entire film studies thing, but it was in the 3rd quarter, and you couldn't do it unless you got a B or better in the first 2 quarters, which were heavy duty critical, honors English in 9th grade.
Yeah.
It was competitive. It was difficult. Every time you stepped in class, you were terrified that you were going to get something wrong. Honestly, that works.
Was that fun for you? Being terrified?
No. But it was okay. Remember the 3 things, and who's the woman who does How to ADHD on YouTube? I want to give her credit. She's wonderful, and I can't remember her name. Jessica McCabe, that's her. She has a bunch of just little kind of digestible things about her ADHD, and she says, here's the 3 things that ADHD people need for their dopamine sensors to kind of get along with the environment and to move forward. It has to be something of personal interest.
Yep. It
has to be something that's challenging, and it has to be something that's new. So I feel like there's something new every day in that class.
Yep.
It was definitely of personal interest because you get to this film school. Like there's something at the sort of mini film school in the 3rd period. And boy, it was challenging.
Yeah.
It was hard.
So here's my question. At what point does challenging become terrified or scared? Because so many students and kids I work with, they'll shut down when they're scared. There was something about challenging. And of course, it's individualized to every person. But for you, what was the secret sauce for challenging?
Okay, so can I ask you this question back?
Yeah.
Why are they scared? Is it because they feel like they're...
Oh, so most kids would not feel like they could do it. So it's more about a capability thing.
Yeah.
So you must have felt capable.
Yeah, I think that I had a really inflated opinion of my intellect when I was growing up. Like I thought I could do anything.
Okay, so there was a confidence about you that I think helped you stay in the challenge zone.
Oh, it's also the reason that I almost failed out of college.
I mean,
but there was...
Because you were confident and you're like,
I'll
be
this.
fine.
Oh, yeah.
I'll be fine.
No, I'm serious. I think that's what happened. I thought I was bulletproof. I thought I was smarter than everybody else. That did not help my social life in high school. But I did. It was probably irrational confidence, but I had too much confidence.
So it worked until
in
it didn't
academics.
work.
I had no confidence in my social skills or my physical skills or my emotional skills, but I think academic, I felt pretty confident.
And of course, musical, I'm sure you had confidence.
I was pretty confident with that, yeah.
And confidence, as we all know, has to do with when our anxiety is low when our confidence is high. And sometimes, like you said, you needed a little more anxiety at UVA, like just a little bit more.
Yeah, I needed a lot more.
But when we're confident about something, that means that we are okay. We are okay to stay in that challenge zone, and it's not scary. It's almost like a fire being lit under us, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I also think I didn't have like as many friends as the captain of the football team, but I had really good friends.
Yeah.
Who I think understood, supported, and helped with that confidence. And I definitely had good parents when it came to that.
Yeah, let's talk about your parents.
They were great.
Yeah, so even though you don't think they knew it was ADHD?
No, no one knew what it was.
No one knew what it was?
No.
What did they see in you? And I mean, how did they nurture that? I mean, what are you just so grateful that they maybe did without knowing that they were doing it?
Yeah, so my mom was the primary parent, and this is not a knock on my dad. My dad was a Presbyterian minister in a medium-sized church, so he didn't have a lot of people, at least early on, who were taking things off of his plate. So he was gone most of the time, but he wasn't like gallivanting around. He was in hospitals and in hostels and dealing and raising money. He was like a tireless fundraiser in the Durham community. So he did make his time count, but most of the day-to-day was with my mom. She was also a musician and just found ways to inject music into every single part of my life because she knew that I liked it. She knew that I was good at it. And I think she liked it as well. So that was the way that we communicated.
That's awesome.
When I was 13, she bought me this ridiculously expensive synthesizer called a Roland D50 that I had seen in a shop window and knew because the clothes that I wore and the job that my dad had. And I knew that I wasn't well off. And so I didn't even ask for it. It just would make no sense to ask. I remember it was $1,395. And it was on sale from like $1,700. But this place called the Music Loft had it for $1,395. I'll never forget that number because it was blowing my mind. And she gave it to me for Christmas. And poor my mom. So if you give one kid, even if they love it, like a $1,395 gift, you have to give the same amount to the other guy. And my brother didn't really ask for anything. So she gave him a bunch. This year was, Dale will tell you all about this. She gave him as many CDs or records or tapes or whatever she could find because my brother was a big music fan. And then like $400 worth of socks. It was like The biggest sock haul of all time. Dale still talks about this, but it was my parents making sure. And I think after that, he's like, Mom, you can just give me cash next time. It's totally okay. And there weren't a lot of presents like that,
Right.
but that was one that I think she gave it to me because she believed that was something that I was meant to have to develop my brain.
And I bet you pretty much felt very seen in that moment by your mom.
I did. I mean, from my dad too. I'm sure. He was the one who was signing the check and was probably like, "What?
What is
I think
this?
we can buy a grand piano for this much."
Yeah.
And I kept that thing through until Kim and I moved to New York. It's what I played with our college band. It's what I used when I was in 10th grade because I hadn't made the top show choir, and they brought me on as a musical accompanist for like special effects sounds. So it was with me most of the time.
That's awesome.
It was my best friend. It was my only friend.
It sounds like a security blanket.
It was a little bit of a security blanket. And then I found one on eBay, and I bought it like 2 years ago. So I have it like, I don't even play it. It's just sitting there next to me when I write stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I want to talk real quick about who's listening to this podcast, because it's parents raising kids and teens with ADHD. I know I have some teens with ADHD who listen. They've told me. They're like, thanks for having a podcast.
Oh, that's cool.
Do
do you feel hip when you hear that?
I kind of feel hip that I'm on their list.
Radar.
Yeah. So let's start with parents. What would you want parents to know? You are a parent, but also what do you want parents to know maybe if their kid is young? So kids are now getting diagnosed with ADHD pretty young. So not super young because all kids are active. All kids have a short attention span, but around 5 to 8 years old, if it's a more severe presentation of ADHD, we can pretty much name that that's a struggle. So if if a parent is new to this journey,
sure.
what do you want them to know?
We really love you. We do. We know whether it's in the front of our head or the back of our head that we can't do this without you. Having said that, we really can't help some of the weird stuff that we're doing. I know that because I've lived for 48 years now, and I still do some of the things that I did back then. I'm currently not medicated. I was only medicated for a couple of years because I was blessed to find something that worked for my type of brain. We need a different type of education than the type of education that at least most schools provide. And I know this because I've been through it. And we do very well with quick problem solving, I think, for the most part. But it's sometimes hard to see that far down the road. And it's not because we don't care. It's not because we don't want to be good. It's because our brains are fixated on what's right in front of us.
Right.
So I think I said it before. If you have a computer, there's RAM and there's ROM. Our RAM is amazing, that's the stuff that like really quickly gets to stuff. And then like our long-term storage is a little problematic. We really don't want to use it as an excuse, but we have to sometimes. If you give us grace with understanding, and if you give us some time, and if you take the time to understand what is going on in our brain, I think that grace will come naturally. We will try harder to fix it than if we're being shamed for it. And that's not going to be easy for parents to do because we are maddening sometimes because we probably don't match up with your brain.
Right.
Even if you have ADHD.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say is in my line of work over the last probably 20 years I started working in schools in 2001 all the way until 2010, and then have been in private practice since then. But just in my career, as we were talking about the time frames of when no one really knew what this was, and then you weren't diagnosed till college, I work with lots of parents who for the first time I will give, feedback about what I think is going on with their kid. And they're like, you just described my brain. I've just been
diagnosed.
I've been overcompensating all these years. And it's like you look around and you're like, wait, this isn't hard for everyone else? And so I think there's a parent journey there too, that obviously you're going to have compassion for your kid if you also have ADHD, but you're absolutely right. Even two brains with ADHD are very different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think because for the most part, if you're a parent like me, you've coped with these things for so long, and it's taken you probably 30 years to get to that point. If you not understanding why your son or daughter is acting like this is like saying, why aren't you 30 years older?
Right. So they don't have the experience.
But I even struggle with it too, because I see all of it. My son chews on his shirt. That's the weirdest thing. Why is it just us? It's just me and him.
It's not.
But it seems like it. I don't know anybody else who does it.
It's not just you.
But I look at it and I'm like, oh, dude, stop it. It's gross. And I have to, that's wrong. That's the wrong response. But I still do. So it just is impossible for someone to give full grace, full grace, empathy, and understanding. But I think both sides have to try. Here's what I would tell, the one thing I would tell kids and parents. You've got to be forgiving, but you got to try. You can't use it as an excuse and just lean on it. Mm-hmm. You've got to, if there's a list or if there's something out there that works, you've got to say it and not have shame in it. That's the reason why a lot of people haven't said, "Oh, I got to make a list," or "Oh, I got to go to even to a therapist or to a counselor to help us out with that," is because there's shame around this.
Right.
There's shame as a parent. There's shame as a kid. There's shame everywhere. So if you don't get out and talk about it and make an effort, then that just kind of festers.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we're here talking about it, is because
thank you.
I want everyone to this is normalized. You are working and playing and in school with all kinds of brains. And the more you understand that everybody's brain is different, the better. So what would you say to any kids who are listening? Teens, college students with ADHD.
Well, you've got a great brain. It's not broken. It doesn't necessarily line up with traditional education. And unfortunately, it doesn't line up with most traditional jobs. And so that's what school is, right? It's preparing you for jobs. And because jobs are all kind of their own way, then school kind of has to be its own way too. Sorry, that's a bit of a tough start for this, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a number of opportunities out there for you, both in your education and in your life, that will give you a chance to shine. Yeah.
And then this is going to be our final question, because I think it might have some discussion, is I feel like we're at a point in our just generational shifts where jobs are a lot more diverse in terms of being able to do different things that have matched your brain, and school is not. So school is still preparing our kids for a traditional track, usually. And you have had a very non-traditional career over time. So you've asked me this question actually before, but I'm going to ask you, if you could design a school for your brain and other similar, but of course, different brains from yours, what would it look like that would have prepared you maybe sooner or more confidently? Although you didn't need any more confidence, it doesn't sound like.
It really, that's
maybe other kids need it.
That's the big thing we got out of this. I was a cocky son of a gun.
So how would you design that school? What would you want to see differently in your perspective of how we're educating our kids?
I think I would, you know how Derek Zoolander had this school for kids who can't read good? Like it was very out there and kind of on the nose. He wanted to build, I think I would call it the school for people with neurodivergent brains, even though ADHD is a horrible name. It'd be like a long, ridiculous name. Like I would lean into it instead of just walking around saying, well, I'm going to get over this. Like you have ADHD or whatever we're going to call it, because we're going to change the name because the name sucks.
We've talked about this.
Yeah. EFD, executive functioning difference. Let's just call it that.
I like it.
We'll call it the EFD school. And everyone who goes there high fives each other's and like, this is our brain. And we will have classes like math and science, and we'll, I don't think there's definitely not going to be people sitting and facing a teacher. They got rid of that, right? They don't do that as much anymore.
Not as much, but middle school and high school are still very much you're sitting and facing a teacher.
And we're just going to lean into it. We're going to say, here's your dopamine hit. Like, here's something you're going to do here. It's a natural dopamine hit. We're going to do this. And then when we have to learn history and English, we're just going to call that the crappy classes, or just like something that we're all in this together. Like these are the hard really tough classes. And we're going to make those things of personal interest, new and challenging. So they're going to be taught not in a textbook format, but in some way that either allows you to imagine it. I'm not saying put up a video and watch it, but in some dynamic way that allows you to imagine it, whether that's taking on a role of someone in history for an entire year and have to live it through them, like something different.
Mm-hmm.
The history classes and the English classes are going to be freaking 15 minutes long. But we're going to do them 3 times a day or something like that. We're not going to sit there for an hour and hear about the New Deal. It just doesn't work.
Because probably 15 minutes in,
I'm done.
You're ready to write a song about the New Deal, and you can't listen to the rest of the lecture.
Yeah, I want to test after 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then literally later that day, let's do it again and give me another test. But we just need, for things like that, we just need to break it up. And I don't think there's anything wrong with learning that way, right? I think I might have 47 classes in a day, and each one is 10 minutes.
Yeah, and of course there are huge.
Every parent's like getting hives right now,
right.
teachers and
There's
principals.
Huge structural systemic issues with
there's
creating this school, but
not if everyone's got it.
But if everyone is there who needs flexibility and it's normalized and it's not othered, that's the point.
What about also? I always felt like I learned more when I was either saying it out loud or teaching it or something myself.
Mm-hmm.
What if there's like an apprenticeship situation where you actually have to teach it?
Right. So, I think that many would say in the research on memory and recall that information's really not synthesized until you can teach it.
Uh-huh.
And so when we're just testing and we're spitting it back out, we all know that there's stuff we knew in school that is gone forever from our brain because we memorized it. It was not really something we actually learned and could apply. So there's definitely something to be said for that. Yeah. And I think for a lot of things that you're describing actually work for all learners, and just works a little better and in a shorter time frame for ADHD brains.
So it's funny, we haven't really talked about as much about the curriculum as we have about the approach to learning it.
Yeah.
But I've never really sat and thought, like, do we really need history? Can't you just read a book about that in your spare time if you're interested in? Because a lot of our history is really depressing and teaches us that we were terrible people.
Well, I think that that's all in the conversation about education. I mean, not currently, but I think that many people who are educating neurodivergent learners are asking some of those same questions. It mostly comes up with math. I know you liked math, but there are many, many kids who the most common question is, I am never going to use calculus ever in my life.
There is a certain level.
There's
where you're
definitely
like,
you might feel like history, how many kids feel about math because it doesn't feel relevant. So I do think there's this relevancy factor that goes along with what we've talked about, about, we need to be educating our kids in a way that prepares them for what they're doing in the world. And we're in this like shift of jobs are evolving, but education is not.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm super passionate about.
And you're much better at it than I am. So I just designed the most ridiculous school of all time that I would go to and probably not even anybody else. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is I just think for me and probably a lot of people like me, and this really affected me in college, like sitting there for 2 hours sometimes for a lecture or for 90 minutes or for however long it is and expecting your brain not to wander, and then feeling ashamed when it does, and you like snap back out of it, and all of this stuff has happened. There could be some other way to do this that allows for just a little bit more. I use the word staccato, kind of like bouncing around like a little bit, learning, as opposed to this very long period of.
Yeah, and I think that there are ways that we can't change the overarching system of education, but you can absolutely pull some of the things you've said just today. A teacher could say, oh, I can make that happen in my classroom for this one kid within the structure that teacher's working in. Or a parent could say, oh yeah, I'm going to make sure my kid gets tons of movement, or we align it with interest or whatever for a task at home. Like we have to just start on that level, on that micro level, because that's the stuff that makes the difference. Like you were saying with your mom and how she incorporated music. Can you imagine if you just had somebody telling you to do stuff all day long and it wasn't aligned with your interests.
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
ADHD is very important with the people that you have around you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the case with anything.
Yeah.
With anxiety, with any of it. But like, you're not interviewing me as someone who has a bio, who has any level of success right now, if it weren't for my wife and her ability to put up with me, give me grace, but also motivate and challenge me, like not to let it be an excuse. So, I'm really fortunate in that sense that I found someone who's able to do that. And that is proof that if you are living with someone with ADHD, like you're the first person they'll thank when they win the Nobel Prize or an Oscar or whatever the heck it is that they win, because they can win if they work really hard. But that is so important.
Yeah. So just keep showing up for your ADHD people.
Keep showing up for ADHD people. Give them grace. Don't let it be an excuse. And don't be afraid to talk about it. Like, talk is what makes shame go away.
Yep. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
This has been Learn with Dr. Emily, the podcast. For more resources, including both parent, teacher, and school resources, visit learnwithdremily.com or read my Substack at learnwithdremily.substack.com. Also, we are publishing this podcast weekly, so make sure you're subscribed by pressing the plus, follow, or subscribe button on whatever podcast app you're using right now. This podcast is edited by Earfluence. All information discussed on this podcast is for educational purposes only. If you have immediate concerns about your child, please reach out to a mental health or medical professional. I'm Dr. Emily King, and we will keep learning together next week.